Meet Joe Knox, Prospector. He's been in the mining business for nearly 30 years, one of the real old-timers. And what's more, I'd say he enjoyed every minute of it. No bosses to bother him, going where he liked, when he liked. All he needed was a few simple tools, a canoe, an axe, a pick, and a lot of experience. In a way, you know, prospecting is a kind of detective work. And every year, as soon as the snow was off the ground, Joe was out looking for clues. Clues that would lead to some kind of buried treasure, some hidden body of minerals. It's a job that takes a lot of time and patience. I suppose that every prospector, including Joe, is really driven on by hope. A hope that just over the next hill or just around the next bend, he'll find something big and strike it rich. About 3 years ago, Joe discovered a small outcrop with a good showing of copper, lead, and zinc. In fact, it looked so good that after he examined the ground around it, he decided to stake a group of claims. Didn't take him long to blaze a line around the sides of each claim and cut a post for each corner. But Joe knew as well as anyone that staking a claim doesn't mean there's anything under the surface. It just gives you a fair chance to find out. The only way Joe could learn the real value of his claim was to dig a hole and look below the surface. But that takes time and money. Joe soon discovered, though, it was almost as hard to raise the money as it was to find the claim itself. After he'd failed to interest some promoters and some other big mining companies, he came up to our office. Bill Olson, our chief geologist, was quite interested and asked to see some samples. A geologist with a big company like ours, you see, is a kind of detective, too. He's always looking for interesting clues, no matter where they come from. Finally, Bill said that after he'd examined the situation a little more, he might be able to make a deal with Joe. Well, that started a piece of detective work that cost us nearly $250,000. First of all, Bill asked some of the staff to check over all the government maps and reports for any useful information. Then, Jean Hertz, one of our young geologists, went to work collecting aerial photographs. From our files and from the Air Force, she assembled a complete picture of the area around Joe's claim. Studying the photos, she got some useful clues about the rock structures. Their trend seemed to show there was a good chance of finding ore deposits and maybe a future mine. Well, when Bill looked at all of the material, he was really interested in Joe's find. To Bill, the area looked even better than one up north we were working on. And at our exploration meeting, he gave some pretty good arguments in favor of it. So we decided to make a deal with Joe. A cash payment plus a share in anything we made from his claims. We also decided to start a survey project around Joe's discovery. That summer, we set up a camp near Joe's claim. From here, our crew would make an aerial survey of about 300 square miles. We gave Ed Bell, our pilot, a detailed flight plan marked out on a mosaic photograph, so he'd be able to study every landmark in the area he had to cover. Our plane crew would seek clues that Joe couldn't find on the ground, clues hidden under the surface. Of course, it took a lot of fancy equipment and money, but it's not nearly as mysterious as it sounds. First of all, a special kind of camera was set up to take a continuous photograph of the ground. So even if the plane drifted off course a little, we'd have a picture of the exact path it followed. Our plane carries instruments so sensitive that they can investigate rocks 100 feet below the surface. As Ed held the plane about 200 feet above the ground, electronic instruments in the cabin and on the wingtips measured two things: changes in the Earth's magnetic field and how well the rocks below could carry an electric current. Each time the plane crossed the survey zone, Ed turned to make a run 200 yards over from the last one. So as the plane flew back and forth across the area, our instruments recorded the characteristics of the underground rocks. Each swing of the recording pens indicated something unusual about the rocks below, another clue, perhaps an ore body of copper, lead, or zinc. As long as the weather was good, they flew every day, dawn to dusk. While flying operations were still going on, the staff at our headquarters camp was busy processing each day's films and recordings. It saved time to work out in the field, even if conditions were a little primitive. As soon as a roll of film from the aerial camera was dry, one of the boys plotted out the plane's exact flight path by picking out landmarks on the film and comparing them with those on the flight plan. Then all of the unusual places recorded by the plane's instruments were marked on the flight paths. This gave us a map showing all the local areas where ore bodies might lie hidden. While the aerial survey went without a hitch, there was still a lot more information to gather. So we decided to send several ground parties into the area to have a closer look. Our air survey map certainly narrowed down our search. Instead of having 300 square miles to cover, the ground parties could concentrate on 60 promising small locations. The net was closing in. Naturally, on the ground, progress became slower and more difficult. It takes a lot of experience to find your way through the bush. So we hired some expert woodsmen like Jules Leblanc to mark out the exact locations for our ground tests. As a result, the ground parties could follow along with their sensitive survey equipment without too much trouble. Locating the place for each ground test had to be done pretty accurately. It was the exact spot on our air survey map where the instrument showed there was something unusual. By making careful observations and using an aerial photograph as a guide, Jules usually hit it within a few feet. Behind each woodsman, a survey party followed the trail he had blazed. At each test point, they made a series of measurements using several different instruments. One of these was an electromagnetic unit, something like the one in our plane, which measured the amount of electric current the underground rocks could carry. It set up a magnetic field which caused a current to flow through the rocks. Then, by measuring the strength of the current passing through the rocks in different positions, the crew could trace out the exact location of the best electrical conductors, an important clue to the kind of formations we were after. At each test point, they also used a gravity meter to measure the density of the rocks underground. This gave us another helpful clue, as the rocks we were looking for were very dense and heavy. The survey parties got still more clues with a gadget called a self-potential meter. You see, the formations we wanted had yet another characteristic. They usually set up a small electric current of their own, like a flashlight battery. By simply pushing two pots filled with chemicals into the ground, the crew could detect the presence of the current between them and measure its strength. For most of that summer and fall, the survey crews kept up their methodical detective work. One by one, they eliminated the locations that didn't have all the characteristics of an ore body. In addition to electrical and gravity tests, they gathered samples of soil and vegetation to find out by chemical tests if they had absorbed any trace of minerals from the rocks below. When the ground survey was finished, we all got quite a surprise. We found that Joe's original claim didn't look so good after all. But several miles away, there were 3 other locations with all the characteristics of ore bodies. Well, there was only one way to find out what we had. Diamond drills would cut out samples of the underground rock and tell us for sure if we had an ore body and its exact size and value as well. Believe me, while that drilling went on, the suspense was terrific. The first 2 locations were duds, no ore body. Everything depended on number 3. Well, samples from number 3 showed an ore body, all right, a big one, mostly copper. We even built a model of it. The catch is, the ore's not very rich, and it's very expensive to mine. So now we've got to figure out a cheap way to mine it or wait for the market price to go up. Still, that's the mining business for you. What's Joe Knox doing these days? Oh, he's out in the bush again, looking for that big discovery. After all, there are still some minerals, like gold, for instance, that don't show up, even on the latest instruments. By the way, we've got a new project going on. We started an aerial survey just a few days ago. And this time, I think we'll strike it rich.
Niels Andersen came to Canada from Denmark in 1919 with his mother and father and 5 young brothers and sisters after the First World War devastated Europe. He grew up in Montreal, became a Canadian citizen, and studied geology at night school at McGill University before joining Kaminko's exploration group in eastern Canada in the late 1930s. He worked as a prospector in northern Quebec and Ontario from 1938 to 1959 with Kaminko, and as an independent prospector, being involved in some interesting finds during that period. Niels Andersen went on to establish the Andersen Greenland Syndicate in the early 1960s and secured exploration rights from the Danish government to explore Western Greenland for mineral opportunities. Working with Kaminko Limited in Canada, he got his Canadian partners interested in the Marmoric, West Greenland and Disco Island area, and the Andersen Greenland Syndicate went to work. From 1963 to 1965, while exploring West Greenland's mineral potential, Niels Andersen found what was to become the Black Angel mine. The Black Angel lead zinc mine was discovered across the fjord from an old marble quarry, 700 meters up on a vertical cliff, 350 meters below the top. It was associated with a dark pellite outline on the cliff, long named the Black Angel by the Inuits. Cominco AS and subsidiary Vestgran Mines as the mine holding company was established by Cominco, and the Black Angel went on to be a significant producer of lead, zinc, and silver for Cominco for many years. Mr. Andersen was made a director of the holding company Vestgran Mines for some years to follow. After the Black Angel, Niels Andersen went on to establish the Green Arctic Consortium in 1968 with J.C. Sproul and Associates of Calgary to explore favorable oil-bearing structures in northwestern Greenland. This formation of the Green Arctic Consortium paralleled the Canadian Arctic Exploration Initiative under the Pan-Arctic Consortium, formed between the Canadian government and the private oil sector in 1968 to open up the Canadian and Greenland Arctic to oil and gas and other mineral exploration. These are today, 2011, targets for further oil and gas exploration as well as mineral exploration in the entire Arctic region. During the formation of the Green Arctic Consortium, the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce wrote a letter of reference to the European Operations Office in London, England, as follows. Attached is a copy of a letter of introduction we have handed today to Mr. Niels Aegidius Andersen. Mr. Andersen is a well-known prospector in Canadian mining circles. He could be described as one of the last of the Vikings, as over the years he has organized several summer mineral exploration and expeditions to the west coast of Greenland. One of these expeditions led to the identification of the Vestgran mine, which eventually was brought into production by Cominco. Unfortunately, Mr. Andersen had to sell many of his Vestgran shares early and did not make much money on the transaction. He seems to be well connected in his native Denmark, and as a result he claims that he is in a position to obtain an oil exploration concession off the coast of northwestern Greenland. En route to Copenhagen, he would like to stop off in London to have a conversation with you and possibly International Energy Bank with a view to obtaining some names of prospective candidates whom he might interest in exploring these concessions. Mr. Andersen may seem a little vague in his manner of expression, and we are in no position to judge what he might be able to deliver by way of an exploration concession. In any event, he would appreciate your seeing him. Expected date of arrival is April 8th. The modern prospector continues to operate as Niels Andersen did during his career. The desire, will, sense of achievement, and pure entrepreneurial spirit to find the next big ore body abides in all professional prospectors.